It's time for our Sandbox story. In our story today, Jesus knew that it was time for him to leave this world. And so he wanted to do something special for his 12 friends, the disciples. Now remember, Miss Kristen, one of our rules is that we have to use our imagination. Now, I don't have all 12 disciples, unfortunately. So we have to use our imagination that there really are 12. But I do have a couple of them that we can put out. So let's get all of his disciples out there. Now there are two disciples that were pretty close to Jesus. The first one, his name was Peter. Put Peter right there. The other one was Judas. He becomes an important role later on in the story. So we have Jesus, Judas, and Peter. Those are going to be our three main characters for today. Okay? So like I said, they were preparing for a feast, a large meal. Now, what do you normally have in a really large meal? When you get together with your family, what's something that you always have? I don't know about you guys, but when my family gets together, we always have lots and lots of food. So I bet they had some fruit, like apples and pears, maybe some strawberries. And they also had bread. Now with a lot of food, you have to have something to drink, right? So they had some jugs of water. And we also know that there was wine. Now, with all these disciples, they're ready to eat all this food. So let's put some plates out there. Maybe some bowls for the disciples to eat all that wonderful food. Now, as the disciples were getting ready for the feast and setting the table, Jesus decided that he wanted to do something to show his friends how much he loved them and do something that was very caring in that time. So Jesus got out a large bowl of water. And in the Bible it says that Jesus took off his outer robe. Let's take off his robe. And then he tied an apron. So we're going to tie this apron around Jesus. See if I can get it to stay this time. Had issues with it earlier. There we go. Nice and tight. So Jesus, with his apron, kneeled down and he decided to wash the disciples' feet. So one by one, they would come up and Jesus would dip their feet in, wash them and dry them. Dip the other foot in, wash and dry. When it came time to Peter's, when it was Peter's turn, Peter said to Jesus, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus replied, "Peter, you do not understand what I'm doing now, but you will later." And so he knelt down and washed his feet. And then Peter said something to Jesus. He says, Peter loved Jesus so much that he said, Then don't just wash my feet, but my head and my hands also. Peter wanted to be as close to Jesus as possible because he loved him so much. Once all the disciples' feet were washed, Jesus put the apron away and put his robe back on. Let's stick his robe back on. Come on, Jesus. There we go. And I take the bison away with all the water. So it's time for the meal. As they were eating, Jesus sadly told his disciples, "Soon, one of you will betray me. One of you will tell people who don't like me where I am so that they can take me away." And this really upset the disciples. They started talking to each other. Who's it going to be? Who's going to betray Jesus? It wouldn't be me. I love Jesus so much. So then they started asking Jesus, "It's not me you're talking about, is it? It's not me you're talking about, is it?" When Judas went to Jesus and asked, "It's not me you're talking about, is it?" We're having leg issues, sorry. There we go. "It's not me you're talking about, is it?" And Jesus sadly and gently replied, "Yes, Judas, you will betray me." Then Jesus took the bread and blessed it and gave some to each of his friends, saying, "Take this bread and eat it. This is my body." Then he took the wine, saying, "Drink this. It is my blood, which I have given up to the sins of the people may be forgiven." When the meal was over, Jesus and his friends went to the place called Mount of Olives. And Jesus said sadly, "Soon you will all leave me." And Peter felt bad. He said, "Even if all the others leave you, I won't," he said. Jesus looked at his dear friend and quietly said, "Before the sun rises, you will pretend you do not know me 3 times. Peter said, "Jesus, I love you too much to ever do that to you." And all the other disciples said the same thing. But while they were in the garden, Jesus decided that he was going to go to a quiet place away from the other disciples to pray. But before he left, he asked the disciples to stay awake and stay with him. They all agreed. And then Jesus went further into the garden to pray. And he said, "Dear God, please make me strong and help me trust you." And Jesus finished praying, came down to the garden, and what he found, instead of seeing his disciples awake like he asked, he found something he wasn't expecting. The disciples were asleep. They were laying down. It was late at night and they were tired. And after a big meal like they did earlier, with a full belly, they get pretty tired pretty quick. So when he came down the mountain into the garden and saw his disciples asleep, Jesus said very loudly, "Wake up, wake up, wake up," he told the disciples. When Jesus was finished praying, it was time for them to go and face hard things. Even though Jesus had many friends, he had some bad enemies too. Some people were scared that Jesus would change the world too much with love. Judas was one of those who were scared. So Judas, if you remember from our story earlier, Jesus told Judas that Judas is going to betray him. And he did. Judas told some of Jesus' enemies where Jesus was. Then soldiers came into the garden. And Judas kissed Jesus on the cheek to show the soldiers which one of them was Jesus. So he kissed him on the cheek. And the soldiers knew exactly which one was Jesus. And they took Jesus away. Judas and Peter were so scared that this happened that they ran away. So Judas ran away, and Peter did the same thing. He ran away, and he hid. I'm going to have him hiding over here in the bushes. Excuse me. So the soldiers took Jesus away. Peter and Judas were hiding because they were so scared. Later, Peter waited outside the place where Jesus was being held. And a little girl came to him, saw him hiding, and yelled, "He's a friend of Jesus. He's in trouble too." Peter wanted to help his friend Jesus, but he was so scared. And so he pretended he didn't know Jesus. And he said, "I don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know him." Peter said. He lied and made him feel even worse inside. Peter ran away again and cried and cried and cried. Peter felt so sad for Jesus, and he felt very, very sorry because he knew what Jesus said was true. Jesus said, if you remember, that Peter was going to betray him and pretend that he didn't know Jesus 3 times. Just like he knew that Judas was going to tell the soldiers where he was. So that's the end of our story for today. I really hope you enjoyed it. It's a little different not having you here with me, but I really hope that you enjoyed our story and join us for tomorrow's story about Good Friday. Hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.